Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice. This is my podcast you are listening to. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. If this happens to be your very first time listening, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres, different backgrounds, established and emerging singers, singer-songwriters, music therapists, and music journalists, and so much more. On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to singer-songwriter Rafael Cohen. You may know him from his previous group, El Guapo, who recorded for Dischord, or his current band, Chick, who are currently working on their 9th album. But Rafael has a solo project out, is recently released. It's called Las Palabras, out on Brassland. It features him singing in Spanish for the first time with Brazilian-inspired music. In our conversation, we talk about a lot. We talk about his moving between the worlds of jazz when he played the oboe and later studied with free jazz composer and multi-instrumentalist Anthony Braxton, and going into the world of the DC punk scene. We also talk about his becoming aware of Brazilian music, his influences, the making of Las Palabras, and you are going to hear 2 songs from the album right after the conversation. Condesa, one of my favorites, and also Juan Pared, which we talk about. My apologies for the sound quality in some spots, those troubling, pesky internet streaming issues, but it does not take away from a great conversation. Here it is, my interview with Rafael Cohen. Enjoy. I love the album. Sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, man. You know, immediately, the first time I was in college, I was a college DJ, and I had heard David Byrne's compilation, Post-tropicália. And so, like, when I heard your album, like, immediately put me to that mind feeling. And then, like, to see that one of the songs, what Juan Pared is about sports, and Jorge Ben's song, Umba Baruma.
Yeah.
So what was your introduction to that music, the influence on you? Like, when would you have heard all that?
Yeah. You know, I mean, that seems like a very organic entry point and also connection to make, because I think that, you know, so much of Brazilian music was introduced in the United States by David Byrne. In a way, he's kind of into people's consciousness, you know what I mean? But my first awareness of Brazilian music actually came from my aunt, because my family is from Guatemala, and my father's family is from, what was Israel. My father's family was Palestine back then. Anyway, it was 7 brothers and sisters, and they were Sephardic Jews, so they spoke Spanish. And essentially what ended up happening is when they emigrated, my grandfather emigrated to Guatemala, and a great aunt, who I actually never met, emigrated to Brazil. So we had family in Brazil. And my aunt, my father's sister, moved to Brazil in the 70s. And stayed with them and hung out with them and learned Portuguese and stuff. So she came back with a real knowledge of this, this whole world of music. Yeah. And when I was a kid and I started getting into to music and stuff, she gave me a couple of Caetano CDs as they were being released. There was one called like Livro, I think, in the early 90s. And she gave me a Jorge Ben CD and stuff. And so she really introduced me to this music. And then later on, like you, I got into Mutantes and all this kind of stuff through David Byrne and through that, when that kind of got cool again in the early 2000s. But it's really my aunt who first introduced me to it. And he said, there's this whole world of music that, Brazil is so interesting as a culture because it's just this island of Portuguese in the middle of Spanish. Yeah. And they've really developed their own mix of things there and stuff like that. So it's really my aunt who first introduced me to it. Okay.
Did you like it immediately, or was it cool because your aunt was cool?
My aunt is cool. She lives in Murray Hill, actually. But no, it took me a minute to get it because it was so, I was a punk rocker and that music was so pretty, which I took as a kind of a pejorative at that point. It wasn't like, but then as I kind of got into it further, I got more and more into it and more into kind of the style of it,
And how did you get into the hardcore and punk music?
Well, I moved to D.C. from Mexico City when I was 10, and Washington, D.C. is a very kind of famous, lauded punk and hardcore scene, and that's what I kind of fell into when I was 12, when I first got into music, and, I was going to see Fugazi and bands like that play, and it just immediately captured my... it's like, for me, I never really got into classic rock that much. I skipped straight to that. So, like, for me, the members of Fugazi were like, members of Led Zeppelin or something. But it happened to be that they lived in town. You could see them walking around. So it's like, it was a real kind of, I guess it would be like living wherever Led Zeppelin lived in 1960. Without the debauchery. So so that's how I got into that, and I started playing in bands, and then I got kind of sucked into that whole world.
Did someone turn you on to the music, or you discovered it on your own?
And to that, I was just thinking about that recently, because I'm still friends with a guy who worked at a record store who helped turn me on to that stuff. And I just saw him, actually. He lives in Park Slope. And he was, maybe 4 years older than me, but he was working at the record store at that point. And he played in a band in town called the Nation of Ulysses, which was very... It was amazing band, and they wore suits, and they were like the coolest guys in town and stuff. So, it was really that him at that record store, the drummer, James, who really got me into that stuff. It helped kind of guide me through that stuff. And then so stuff like that. Had
you started?
And my friends in high school too.
Okay. Had you started playing an instrument by that point?
Yeah, I played the oboe at that point.
Oh, okay.
Possibly the least punk rock instrument you could, and then I learned how to play the drums. But I was always studying the oboe too. Just I liked it, and I studied that, and then eventually in high school I got more into jazz and stuff, and so I went to Wesleyan to study because I wanted to take classes with Anthony Braxton, who was a big free kind of experimental jazz musician. And then I played oboe. I kind of focused on being a avant oboist. So it was all kind of happening simultaneously,
Okay. Did you see how you could combine these worlds of hardcore punk and avant-garde jazz? Were you thinking of that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of records I made with my old band El Guapo that, a couple of those records are on Dischord, actually, which I think try to combine all that stuff. They've got oboes and accordions and drum machines, and I think a lot of people that are more into Dischord stuff didn't really understand those records very much at all. But I spent a long time trying to reconcile all that stuff, and thinking about how to do it. And then I kind of moved just more into more pop rock. I moved away from some of the more avant-garde stuff.
When you were in school, were you like in bands, like hardcore bands and punk bands? Were you doing that then?
In high school.
Okay.
In high school. In college, it was more like post-punky kind of weirdo bands. If you bust an oboe on stage with a band, you're automatically in a bit of a corner, weirdness. But real kind of hardcore punk and stuff was when I was, 13.
Yeah. What was it like studying with Anthony Braxton?
It was great. It was great. I was... I showed up there, I remember, and I had been super into his music. I had read the book about him, that book, Forces in Motion, which is about him, and I was excited to meet him. And I remember I talked to him after the first class, and I said, I'm really excited to be here, but I was like, all right, well, why don't you meet me on Saturday? We'll have a jam, we'll just play or whatever. I was like, all right. So he shows up on Saturday. He played all his crazy saxophones, like a bunch of clarinets and saxophones. I had my oboe, and we played for about an hour. And, it was great. And he was very kind of open to the idea of people developing their own musical language kind of under, under him and stuff like that. And I really loved playing with him and kind of just being around this person who had, he had stories about, like being a chess hustler in Washington Square Park and moving to Paris, and had really kind of lived his music in this way that it was similar to the punk people I knew in DC, but it was based on a whole different language and a whole different kind of intellectual framework or something like that. Okay. So it was really inspiring to me.
Okay. What do you learn as a musician from him? Like at the end of all that.
Do you know his music much?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So you first you learn what those crazy diagrams mean that are all his titles, and it's a lot of kind of. When I was there, he was doing this kind of music called the ghost trance music. Okay, where you would kind of like keep I'm air oboing here, but you would keep a pulse. Like dun, 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 you just be keeping the steady pulse, and then you could go and play kind of other parts of his works or whatever. So actually it was a lot of reading music, like a lot of intense reading of rhythms, polyrhythms and stuff like that is really what I took. But I also took specifically in music the idea that you were kind of like, your work was kind of like part of a whole or something like that, because that's what you'd be doing in a sense. You'd be playing some piece he wrote in and you could choose it too. You could kind of split off from the trance, for the and then you could see another person and say like, oh, you want to play this composition that's a triangle with a circle on top or whatever, and you'd be like, okay, and then the two of you you'd count that in and play that kind of on your own, and it was this very like living environment of music. So I think aside from the practical part of just learning how to read and learning how to read polyrhythms and stuff, I also learned that you're kind of in your life, you're building this body of work that you could, if you found a connection within it, the connections within it that they could exist,
Okay. Does it take a while for that to click, to play that kind of music and to like free within a structure?
Yeah, it took a while, and it took a while to develop the kind of, you kind of had to get into his whole, you kind of had to adopt his whole world framework to kind of play it or something like that, so it would be funny because you'd be playing for a while and you'd be deep in it, and you could tell the concert had gone on for 2 hours or whatever, and then it would end, and you felt like you had just run this race, and then you'd look out and everyone would, like, half the audience would be asleep and the other half, because it was hard music to listen to, but it was fun music to play, so it was funny, in that sense, it was a way to experience it. Like if you bought one of those Ghost Trance CDs, I'm sure it would be borderline unlistenable. But if there was a group playing it, you could almost just walk around inside it and even just pick up an instrument and play. Sometimes it was like it was made for that. What I mean? So that was really cool.
Okay, so you might have enjoyed it more than the audience at some point.
100%. Undoubtedly.
Was that your dream? Was like to be like a jazz oboist initially?
Maybe. I mean, there's something like very, this when I was playing punk music in the early 90s, it already felt like it was very kind of old and ritualized and kind of, it felt uninteresting to me in a way. And when I found this kind of weird jazz stuff, it's actually funny how I kind of found jazz at that point too, is because one time Henry Rollins, the singer, before he was really famous, had come to town and done a concert in DC. He was from DC originally, and the guitarist in his band had gone to my high school years before, so we went down to the show under the idea that we were going to interview him for the school paper. Okay. And we were asking him all these questions, like, if you can imagine Henry Rollins, like, he was in his van, like, lifting weights, like, just exactly how you think, being very kind of gruff, And we were asking him all these questions about, like, hardcore music and Black Flag and stuff like that. And I remember somebody's like, look, enough about that stuff. Like, go out and buy these records. And he said, like, go get James Brown's Funky People Part 2, get the first Suicide album, get Albert Ayler live at Greenwich Village. Like, he basically, I want to kill my parents. Did you mean you know, we were like being super kind of dorky about his past. And he was like, there's a whole world of music outside of this. And then we went out and we bought all these records, and that's kind of how we got into to this guy, you know, who had been muscle bound lifting weights. So that's how I ended up starting to listen to like Albert Ayler and Ornette Coleman and James, you know, got super into James Brown and stuff because so that was my opening. And then after that, I thought punk felt a little stale. So I got super into kind of like playing that kind of music, and it just felt punker than being punk or something. You know what I mean?
So after you graduated and you moved back to DC, right?
Yeah. And then I moved back to DC with a band I was playing, which is called Guapo, and we started playing in shows in more in the DC area, and then eventually we got signed to Dischord and put a couple records out there, and so that was when I kind of we started touring more and all that kind of stuff, and we were kind of known as the band on Dischord with the oboe and the drum machine and the synthesizers and stuff, like all the stuff that you didn't usually see on that label. And that was really a fun time. There were a lot of great bands in DC back then, so it was a lot of fun to live there and to be, you know, playing in that community, and also just to be part of that world, which I still in many ways formed how I look at music and how I look at the music business and stuff like that. So is there a difference between when you're playing avant jazz and the challenges that come with that you would get? What are the challenges or you get from, or growth from when you're playing in El Guapo and you're in that scene? Well, it's funny because I did think in some ways jazz was freer and punker than punk, but the kind of jazz establishment, the avant-garde jazz establishment at the time was super, you know, I mean, Braxton was a professor at a university, you know, it had been super absorbed by this kind of different establishment of this more academic establishment. Jazz had become this academic thing, you know, and it wasn't that way when Braxton was coming up, you know what I mean? It was the Wild West, you know, it was lofts and stuff like that. So in a way there was a certain kind of disenchantment when I realized, like, oh, this world is about grants and professorships and this kind of more, you know, so I feel like you would learn a lot from the music and from the attitudes, but the concerts were generally you know, they were in kind of concert halls. The audience felt very limited, and it felt very academic. You know, it felt like you were playing for other students and other professors or something like that. Okay. And when you're playing, you know, punk shows like I did back then, you're playing people's living rooms and stuff like that. You know, it's pretty visceral. You know, even if you're busting the accordion and the oboe out, you're still in people's living rooms and doing that. So in some ways it was a little bit more visceral in that sense, even if there were other groups at that point that were besides ours that were trying to find more different angles on that kind of underground music was. You know what I mean? Yeah. And how far off are you from El Guapo ends in 2006 or 2006? We became we had to change our name because we were going to get sued by another band. Okay. And then we put out 2 records on Touch and Go Records, which is a similar kind of old school punk label in Chicago. And then we broke up in 2006. And then actually it was on the last Super System tour, as the band was kind of felt like it was crumbling around me, that I got this little acoustic guitar on tour, and I started to write more kind of like some of the songs that ended up becoming the Las Palabras songs. Like I was like, you know, it was dysfunctional, and I just had this like $90 mini guitar, and I would sit, and then I was like, I was listening to a ton of Brazilian music, and I was like, I'm going to try to see if I can write some songs like this. You know? And then the band ended. Were you thinking of incorporating that into the band, or?
Like, were you thinking of something solo at that point?
I'm sure they would have shot it down. You know?
Like you would have had to do it solo.
yeah. So then we stopped, and then I made a bunch of early kind of Las Palabras recordings, which aren't really on the album, but I still have them, and you know. And then and I made a 7-inch too, and then I joined Chick 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 in 2010, and then that kind of changed my musical life again, because that was kind of it was a working band or whatever. So I was back doing that kind of stuff.
Okay, so when you're in that working band situation, does that like pull you away from working on stuff on your side, of your own stuff on the side?
Not really. You know, I've there's enough time in the day. You know, it's so different. You know, Chick 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 is, you know, it's such a specific thing. You know, it's this very high energy, dancey, electronic band.
When do you decide to release a solo album? Like, when does that come about? And why?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I heard somebody tell me once that the worst kinds of solo albums are the ones that are the records that have the songs that the other guys in the band didn't like. Yeah. And you turn into it, you know, the other people in the band. And I'm always super aware of that, you know, like, and you know, record albums like that, you know, like if you look, I was thinking about, you know, like Mick Jagger's solo albums and stuff, they're terrible. Or I don't think they're very good. And you can tell he was thinking to himself like, well, I don't have to listen to Keith. I can do whatever I want. And it's not great, you know? But in this case, you know, it was this album a little while ago, and it just happened that Alec, who runs Brassland, contacted me and said, do you still have that record? And he wanted to put it out. So it was great. You know, it was great to have it come out now. I think that there's a lot more of an understanding and of amongst English speakers, you know, like the idea of someone singing in Spanish isn't quite so, I mean, for lack of a better word, foreign seeming, you know, like there's a lot more Spanish music out there. So in a way, I'm glad I waited, because I feel like it's coming out into a world that is more likely to receive it. You know what I mean?
Speak about the fact that you spoke Spanish, but only at up to 4th grade level?
Yeah.
So writing songs when your level is at 4th grade. Like, what is the within the limitations that you can get something out of that? Yeah.
I mean, I moved when I was 10. So it's, you know, I was starting 4th grade. I guess I was 9. I was starting 4th grade, and I'm fluent, you know, you know, I can have a fluent conversation, and I speak Spanish with my parents and stuff like that, but definitely I don't have the same vocabulary or the same access to the vocabulary I do in English. So often when I'm speaking with them, I'll just plug holes in the vocabulary with English words, because I know they understand them, you know. And then when I was setting out to write songs, I think the two parts of it, one was that I kind of imagined that the audience wouldn't be able to understand what I was saying. So it kind of opened up the idea that I could write about things that maybe I'd be a little bit embarrassed to write about in English. And then the vocabulary kind of took over, you know, and it ended up making the lyrics pretty simple. And, you know, even since the album came out, like, my dad has called me and said, like, man, you really didn't learn proper grammar at all, did you? Like, he's pointed out things that are just super janky about some of the Spanish constructions and stuff like that. So, but, you know, I was grateful. You know, it's, I think that it's actually kind of come back and it informed how I write in English. You know, like sometimes I'll, when I'm writing for songs with Chick Chick Chick, I'll sometimes write an idea in Spanish just to get it out as simply as I can, you know, without making it too flowery, and then kind of translate it to get it going or something like that, to try to express it in the simplest way possible. Yeah. So yeah, it's been interesting. Like that, you know, I might run it by someone for the next record just to make sure it's not too embarrassing. Grammatically, you know. But, you know, I might not too, you know, it might be part of the fun, you know.
You know Black Box, the DS group Black Box? They were big in the 90s.
No, I don't.
Oh, yeah. Well, their big song was Everybody, Everybody.
I don't know.
It was okay. It was like the group where they used Martha Wash vocal. Yeah, it's like they're Italian producers, and like when you read the lyrics of the songs, you're like, what the hell are they talking about? Because it's like, English wasn't their first language, and it was like maybe they just like plugged it into a machine and got translation.
Yeah.
So, because in my ear, your album sounds perfect. It's like I don't know. I don't know. I'm your target audience.
Well, that's exactly. You think there's some like profound, deep sentiments being philosophized or something.
So, did you have like how many more songs that are on the album? Did you have a lot of songs to choose from, or?
It's funny. I took a lot, and I remember the album just made sense how it was. Like, there's a couple songs I have that I have never recorded that I think are really good songs, but they just kind of didn't fit with those ones. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've kind of been inspired to start writing again now, just because that records come out and stuff like that. So yeah. But yeah, when I was making the album, it's funny when you make an album when nobody's paying attention to it, and you just can kind of obsess. Nobody knew the project existed. Nobody outside of my friends and stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're able to work on it in your own world and create your own world that makes sense to you with it, because it's free of any outside kind of eyes.
Yeah,
what I mean? And I felt that very much with this record. Like, I remember thinking there was a real logic to the way it was sequenced in the songs that I chose. I don't know if I could describe it to you now, but for some reason it made like total sense to me, but it was just in my own head or something.
Yeah. Talk about, you made a music video for Juan Pared.
Yeah.
Did I say that right, Pared?
You did.
Okay. Describe the concept of the video. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, the song is about, when like I said, I grew up in DC. I grew up following the Wizards, the basketball team. I still follow them. And he got drafted. He was the first pick in the draft, so it's like a very momentous occasion for Wizards fans. And I think you mentioned earlier too, I had noticed that Jorge Ben, who I really love, had written a lot of songs about soccer players. So I thought, well, let me try seeing if I can write this. Again, it was something I wouldn't do in English. And so when it came time to make the video, one of my neighbors down the street had told me he makes animated stuff, and John Wall caused a big stir because the first time he got introduced after he got drafted, he did the Dougie, dance the Dougie. Yeah. And, all these kind of like very buttoned up, mostly white sportscasters that said, if he ever wants to win in this league, he's got to stop doing the shenanigans and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So I wanted to have a video of him like doing the Dougie as much as possible, because I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great. And I talked to this guy who does animation, and I sent him a GIF of John doing the Dougie, and he just created this whole weird like video game world with wizards and basketball hoops and backboards breaking, and it was really cool. I have no clue how he did it. So, like, he had me play the song on a guitar one day, and then 3 weeks later he sent it. I was like, man, I have no idea.
Yeah. I know. I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure out like, what did he do? But it's great to look at. It's great visuals.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah. I was really pleased, that it came out like that, and that it kind of like memorializes. Not, actually, he just got traded, so that it memorializes his time as a Wizard. Yeah. In a way that I think is nice.
Yeah, but the Dougie will forever carry on. So
of course,
yes, that transitions to any place.
Yeah, the Dougie has no borders, no time. For that.
Yeah. Are you someone who's always working on music while this album's out, but you're still working on stuff?
Yeah, we're doing a Chick record right now, actually. And like I said, I have a couple of newer Las Palabras things that I'm working on now too. So yeah, always working on stuff. I feel like I kind of think that I still am under the belief that the next song I write is going to be the best, better than the ones I've written before. So so yeah, I'm still kind of after it. And then how the music business is, like, it takes so long for things to come out that by the time they're out, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that thing, but you're kind of doing the next the next couple things. Is there anything you can say about the Chick album?
How the progress is with that?
Yeah. It's funny. It's interesting to be releasing a debut album and then to be working on a band's 9th album. And the different context, it's like the with the first record, you have so much of a story behind it, and there's so much of you've kind of like the project has existed. You've kind of existed with the project for so long before anyone's actually heard it. And when you're on your 9th record, that's not the case at all. Like everyone knows exactly what you can do, what you generally do. You're kind of like playing against expectations or playing towards expectations. So I think that with it's funny at the same time as kind of explaining the story of what this record is. we're also kind of like trying to figure out what the story of the next Chick record is, which is, I think, from how I see it, at least, it's a band that thrives on playing shows that hasn't been able to play a show in a year, and kind of the bottled up kind of nature of that, and how that's going to be expressed, and how we're going to best be able to kind of use those limitations to our advantage in terms of making a different kind of record or something like that.
Okay. And I guess you guys are hopefully we'll be able to tour in 2021.
I hope so. With both of these things, like I'd love to do more Las Palabras shows too. It's actually, like, in some ways the most nerve-wracking thing I've done is get on a stool and play guitar and sing. It can be very awkward.
I get that.
But I'd like to do it more.
Yeah. And where's the best place people can check out what you're doing online, get the album?
Well, on Instagram, it's Mexicohen, at Mexicohen, Mexicohen. And then there's links there to go, Spotify and Bandcamp, I think, is what Alec would prefer. Alec, who runs the label, would probably prefer people check it out at Bandcamp.
Shout out to Alec. Cool. This was
shout out to Alec and Brassland.
Brassland
had a big year.
Yeah, they did. So this was great. As I said, I love the album. I think it's great. This is a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Estaba caminando por esa ciudad donde yo nací, cuando vi a un tipo caminando que era igual a mí. Cada decisión en cada situación, que ni una reacción. Cada decisión en cada situación, que ni una reacción. Él iba regresando a su casa, acabó de trabajar. No creo que él notó que yo estaba ahí, fue solo el azar. Cada decisión en cada situación, que ni una reacción. Cada decisión en cada situación, que ni una reacción. Iba a su dirección y yo con mi canción. No era conspiración. En esa ciudad, los dos la misma edad, va bien la realidad. No hay prueba que me puede confirmar la foto creada en la imaginación. A pesar de todo, no hay prueba que me puede confirmar la foto creada en la imaginación. A pesar de todo, quién sabe qué estuviera haciendo si no me hubiera salido de aquel lugar. Y no hay por qué pensar, quién sabe qué estuviera haciendo si no me hubiera salido de aquel lugar. Y no hay por qué pensar. Cada decisión en cada situación tiene una reacción. Don Juan Pared, él va a resucitar lo que habíamos ya enterrado. Y apareció un día por casualidad a mediados de este verano. Lo vi jugando en la televisión, lo vi bailando su celebración. Don Juan Pared, Don Juan Pared, nos va a cambiar toda la suerte, vas a ver. Y un buen aficionado siempre tiene fe en lo que viene. Don Juan Pared. Y puede ser que es el jugador, que es el más rápido en la liga. Y de repente va a tomar tiempo, pero tiempo hay más que vida. Y aunque tome algunas temporadas, ya va a venir nuestra época dorada, cuando estamos aplaudiendo a nuestro equipo y a los partidos que ellos han ganado. Don Juan Pared, Don Juan Pared, nos va a cambiar toda la suerte, vas a ver. Don buen aficionado siempre tiene fe en lo que viene. Don Juan Pared. Ya viste mi sonrisa, te vi jugando en la televisión, te vi bailando una celebración. A ver quién puede defenderte, lo podrán sin mucha suerte. Don Juan Pared.
And that was two from Las Palabras. You heard Juan Pared, and kicking it off, Condesa. I hope you enjoyed the music. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rafael. If you would like to know more about Talk Music Talk, there is a website, talkmusictalk.com, for more podcast information and to stream every single episode. You can also find me on Instagram at This Is Boice, and some call to actions for you. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and many other places like the recently added Amazon Music and Audible. You can find the show there now. Just search for Talk Music Talk. Wherever you happen to listen, please leave a 5-star rating or review because it helps expose the podcast to brand new listeners. There is also a Talk Music Talk app. It is free wherever you like to get your apps at. Again, just search for Talk Music Talk. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.